A psychologist, a psychotherapist, as well as having a full membership to the British Society of Criminology, an author, a recent TEDx speaker, and founder of the National Awareness Day No Phones at Home, Dr. Charlotte Armitage, welcome to Thriving in Our Forties.
Hello. Hi. Nice to meet you. Nice to speak to you.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. And it's an absolute honour because although I've just read out a tiny fraction of your CV that I found on your website, it is such an honour to have you on because you've got so many professional accolades and accreditations to your name. So I'm thrilled that you could join me here today to talk about your new book, which is Generation Zombie: Why Devices Are Harming Our Children and What We Can Do About It. So, as the title suggests, it is about phone use and devices and how parents or carers or adults in general can encourage the young people in our lives to put down our phones or put down their phones and physically connect with the world around them.
Mm.
So, I'm going to start with the most obvious question, which is why did you write the book?
Well, so I was being inundated, to be honest, with requests for private therapy, and it just was very, very odd. My waiting list was full. Most people were full, and I started to think what was going on. I'd already had my reservations about screens and how they were being used. You start sort of seeing and noticing things out and about, and I think I'd written a few pieces about it. But something just, to be honest, clicked one day, and I thought, wow, these devices have really invaded every area of our lives. And at what cost? So my experience or my training is from a psychodynamic modality, which really looks at the childhood environment, to look at the past, to explain how what we're seeing now. In normally in a person, so we'd be looking at what happened in their childhood, what went on with their relationships, and why do they present with the behaviours they present with as an adult. And most of these theories were written, 100 years ago, decades ago, a long time ago. And I just thought they don't. None of it. The world's changed a lot since then, and actually, these devices are. We have a very toxic relationship with our devices, don't we? They are quite controlling, little things that we've got in our lives that whenever they say beep, we immediately give all of our attention to them. So they're very controlling, toxic little things that we all have relationships with. And I just thought it started to sort of look at it and analyze it, and then go on to sort of researching it a little bit more about how was that then displacing the parent-child relationship and our relationship with everyone around us, and then consequently, what was the impact of that displacement, especially for children who require their primary caregiver for development in the early years.
Well, I read the book, I devoured it, and I encourage everyone, young and old, to read it. But the purpose of this conversation that we're going to have today is obviously we're going to do a bit of a deep dive into some of those topics that you just touched on, and it's not going to be your standard Q&A interview. Rather, we're going to do a bit more of a role play scenario where we're going to hear, I say in inverted commas, from both the child and the parent about their thoughts around device use. And then, Charlotte, you are going to give your professional opinion about how, like you just said, how we can all move forward together and navigate this really quite challenging landscape that none of us have had any previous experience of. And the reason why I wanted to do this, I think it's because I hope you will agree, is that it's easy for both parties to dismiss the other's thoughts and feelings around how we use phones. So by having this open conversation, I hope the parent will feel listened to, the child will be understood. And it's not about lecturing, it's about creating that balance, because phones aren't going anywhere, devices aren't going anywhere, they're going to be part of our lives. So I would love for this conversation to be listened to by young and old, and whether that's in the car or around the kitchen table. I really hope the advice we're going to share is going to provide comfort and support for that family life dynamic when phone use plays such a major part. So I'm going to present a scenario, and then we're going to break down that scenario into different topics. And then, Charlotte, you're going to go on and give your professional and also balanced view about, like we just said, how we can move forward and create more of a harmonious balance within the world of electronics. Okay, so this is the scenario, and then we'll go on to the first topic. The scenario is it's 10 o'clock at night, your child is still scrolling, and the parent is getting frustrated. The child says, just 5 more minutes. I think this sounds familiar across the board. And so the first topic we're going to go into is devices and FOMO, which is obviously fear of missing out. And the child might have responded to the above. But if I don't check my phone, I'll miss out on what all my friends are doing. It's not about being addicted, it's about staying included. The parent might then reply, but you're always online. It's like you're living in a world that's not even real. Now, Charlotte, I think young and old, we both feel that. We feel that we need to be online to stay in touch. So how would you respond to this exchange?
So first of all, the 5 minutes. To be honest, I think it's reasonable for us to allow a child 5 minutes. So because if someone said to us, right, stop what you're doing now, we'd sort of say, okay, in a minute, wouldn't we? We wouldn't just stop. So I think there's that sort of that's okay to say, right, 5 minutes, but then 5 minutes is up. So it's setting a boundary. Now, I could go on about this all day, but ideally, no phones in the bedroom. It's no phones an hour before bedtime. So with that, then just it removes the option for argument and debate at that time of night if it's just not there anyway. So one of the things I would advise is that all phones are charged downstairs, because the research has found that even just having a phone in your room is enough to affect your sleep. And we know how important sleep is for all of us, but especially children. But in terms of FOMO, that is absolutely the one thing that whenever I work with schools and teenagers, children, it's FOMO is the one negative that they all comment on about reducing their time on devices. And the way that I have handled it is to help them put it in perspective. So a child is never going to think that, first of all, they're never going to think they're addicted. So a child saying, I'm not addicted, I mean, do they understand what it is? Do they understand what that term really means? Actually, if they might well have a habit, should we say, if we're going to use that kind of language, they might well have a habit of using their device. But if they're as with any addict, they'll tell you they like whatever it is they're addicted to. A smoker will say, well, I like smoking. Of course they do, because they're addicted to it. It's only really the people from the outside that can see the impact that an addiction has on someone. When someone's in an addiction, they don't necessarily see how problematic it is for their lives. And children definitely don't have that the ability to regulate like that. And in terms of the FOMO, that is always going to be an issue. I think we're always going to is normalizing that. It's normalizing that we will always feel that we're missing out on something in life. It doesn't matter who you are, how old you are. You feel it as grown up, don't you? As an adult, you'll feel that, oh, well, why wasn't I invited to that? Or, oh, I wish I was going out tonight. I mean, FOMO is something we need to learn to tolerate. So that would be my advice: is help your child learn to tolerate that feeling of missing out, saying that it's normal, you are going to feel like that, but actually your sleep is more important, so that you can function as bright as possible the next day with a good mood after a deep night's sleep, with your focus intact. The impact of not having a good night's sleep is far outweighs any potential FOMO, I would say. So it's that. But if you can get these rules in place with your children from a young age, so you sort of say, we're not having devices at the dinner table, children don't have devices in bedrooms, and at least an hour before bed, no screens. If that becomes normalized, then it's it becomes not such a problem as they get older. But we have to normalize it while they're young.
It's those boundaries, isn't it? Setting those boundaries early on. Fantastic. Okay, we're now going to go on to topic number 2, which is devices and peer friendships. A child might say, messaging, gaming, and social media are how we bond now. And a parent might reply, but what happened to just hanging out in person? Now, I think this is so different to how, well, I grew up, the generation where there wasn't a device. So the only way to socialize was to go out and see people. So, Charlotte, how would you respond to being online now in terms of having a social life?
I think they need a balance, don't they? I mean, if a child says that that's how they connect, I would probably argue that maybe a child doesn't understand different levels of connection, because it's a superficial level of connection to connect over via via a screen, and we need in-person interaction and connection to survive as a species. We need that, and those relationships form when people play together in person. So from the work that I've done, when children do reduce the time on screens and they spend more time in person, they say that they feel happier, they feel better. That a lot of children tell me they only really connect online because that's what everyone's doing, but they would prefer to be with others in person.
Mm.
So I think that, yes, there's an argument that they might play games together, and that's maybe they have some time where they do that. But as long as it's balanced by making sure they have more time, I would say, a lot more time connecting with their friends in person and spending time outdoors, really doing the things that are actually healthy for them. Time behind screens there's a number of reasons why it's unhealthy, and it's hard to limit that, as you sort of said in the previous example. You try to put a limit on it, it can cause problems. So having those boundaries in place, it's a problem. Children are always happier when you put them with other kids. They are, and they're always happier when they're playing in the real world than they are when they're playing online. So a child might feel like they're connecting, but if you take the screen time away, it can't be a case of just saying, oh, well, we don't want you playing games online, and it's just games are gone, but then what? I think instead it's a case of, if you take that away, do an activity that involves engagement. So whether that's with you or with other siblings, or whether it's with their friends, it's sort of like, you're not going to play with your friend online, I'm going to take you both to the park. Or that your friend's going to come around and you're not going to be on screens, you're going to play something together. So you want to still replace that activity where they feel like they're connecting with someone, with something that fosters in-person connection.
Makes complete sense, doesn't it? Yeah, you can't just take it away and expect them to suddenly be, well, what am I going to be doing now? Yeah. Right, topic number 3, devices and relationships. The child might say, it's easier to talk to someone through a screen first, it's less awkward. A parent's potential response, but how will you learn real life communication skills? I think this is another example of how times have changed. But is there a way that we can get a healthy balance between digital intimacy and real connection?
I'd argue there's no such thing as digital intimacy. I really don't think so. And but again, the argument is coming from a child who wants to be on their phone. So it can be used. We do need to learn how to communicate via text. It's a skill to communicate what you want to say effectively, but there's so much nuance in text communication, as we as adults all know. We've all got that text and read it wrong, or someone's taken what we said the wrong way, and we're adults, and we can't get it right, so we can't really expect children to do it. But we are seeing children 18 to 24-year-olds no longer speak on the phone. They're anxious about making phone calls. So they don't like picking up the phone and ringing people because they don't have the interpersonal skills. We have children starting school who can't make eye contact. So our basic interpersonal skills, which are the building blocks of our relationships for the rest of our lives, which will contribute to our life longevity. Because our life longevity is linked to the depth and meaningfulness of the relationships that we have. And if we don't have good interpersonal skills, we won't have strong, healthy, connected relationships. So my argument would be that we need to be practicing these interpersonal skills. People need to learn how to. It is easy. Oh God, it's so much easier, isn't it, to communicate via text? You don't want to say something, well, just send a text. It's a difficult conversation, send a text. It is far easier to do it, but it doesn't mean it's healthier. And I think if you've got the balance where you're good at communicating in person, you can make eye contact, you're confident, you're articulate, you can communicate. I think if you've got that, then yes, you're allowed to use other online communication tools. But if that is your crutch because you can't communicate in person, it's a dangerous path to go down, because more deconditioned we get, or the less used to communicating in person or using our interpersonal skills, the less we're able to do it. So how do these people then, how does this generation then integrate into the workplace and cope with conflict with bosses, for example, or, learn how to navigate that kind of world as well? So definitely, I see what they're saying. It is easy to communicate that way, but only, I think, if it absolutely needs to be done that way, and we need our in-person interpersonal skills to be as good as they can be.
You need the foundations before you can move from there, before you can build on it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Topic number 5, devices and dopamine, which is the happy hormone. A child says, I just want a little happiness hit like everyone else. A parent's response, you're constantly seeking that high. What about real world joys? So I think, it's very easy to turn to the digital world to get that instant high, isn't it? And it takes longer in the physical world to maybe achieve that happiness. So how can we get that high without it involving a screen?
Well, we need to reduce the amount of time on the screen. So dopamine is, as you sort of mentioned it there, it is a neurotransmitter that's its main purpose is to drive our behaviors to drive our actions towards behaviors that we deem as satisfying. So if we've experienced something that we found pleasurable, dopamine will encourage us to repeat that activity over and over again. Now, dopamine is released in response to many different behaviors that we exhibit. So whether that's eating, whether it's exercise, whether it's spending time with people we love, whether it's sex, it's released in response to many things. And it's been hijacked by things like drug abuse, but it's certainly been hijacked by devices. The issue with devices is that what we're seeing is that when a child's on, say, TikTok, so they can scroll quite rapidly. So 10 seconds scroll, 10 seconds scroll, and it is damaging their attentiveness. I spoke to a school yesterday who told me that for the last 3 years, children have been unable to finish their SATs exams because they cannot pay attention for long enough to do their exam. So we are now at a point where we have a generation of people who can't even focus for long enough to do that, to live in their education. The head teacher said to me, she said, what parents are doing with their children at home is putting a barrier in the way of us being able to educate their children. And I completely understood what she was saying, because us providing children with these devices where they get that rapid dopamine hit for very little effort means that these children are now no longer able to pay attention to anything else that requires effort. So because the thing is, if your brain's getting a dopamine hit every 10 seconds is very, very rapid. So how would we expect a child to read a book? Because reading a book, you don't get the reward until the end of the book when you know what's actually happened. It's a lot of effort, and the brain's become conditioned, and it's looking for the dopamine. I fully believe that the overuse of devices, especially in the early years, is contributing to the increase that we're seeing in diagnoses of ADHD. I work with a group of professionals who we're all writing an academic paper on this actually at the moment, because there's mounting evidence about how, because what you do is you wire the brain, and we're treading the tracks, quite deeply in that child's brain. So they get to an age at 6 years old when they're in school where they're sort of, not used to not being without a device. I'm bored. I sit on my hands. I'm bored. I'm fidgety. I want to move. I need some attention. I need to do something, because they're so used to being stimulated all the time that the brain has got used to it. And we're doing this to them without realizing it. This is what the book was all about, to try and give parents the information, because it's not about anybody doing anything wrong. It's that certainly not about parents doing anything wrong. It's parents. We haven't been educated. We weren't told about the risks. But now that the science is coming out, and now we're seeing the risks and we're seeing the impact every single day in every setting, now we've got the information to say, look, let's reduce these screens. And any child, I think, that's saying, the thing with the child is they're always going to come back with an answer. It's about showing them. So, when you start to reduce the time that they spend on screens, my advice is to reduce it gradually each week, or, reduce it by say you might start by saying, right, we're not going to have phones in the bedroom this week. And then you add another, it might be right, well, now we're not going to have phones at the dinner table. You start to add in
Okay.
periods of time where you just reduce it, do it in a collaborative way where they can say, I want this, and you can say, we want that. And you come to some sort of agreement so the child is involved. And you, as well as the parent, will have to get involved with this. I mean, my daughter constantly tells me off. You know, if I'm on my phone, she checks up on me. What are you doing? Nothing. You know, I have to hide. So we have that kind of thing now where she knows what I'm doing. But I set this with her years ago. I said, you know, you tell me when I'm on my phone. I'll tell you, because sometimes we don't even know we're doing it. It's so automatic. So you set that kind of precedence in your household, and that's how you deal with it. Sorry, I've gone off track there, but in terms of the dopamine, I think it's so addictive. It does pull our attention into it. We need to encourage the child to come off the device, really, because if they are looking for that dopamine hit, we are damaging their attention span. And that's going to have an impact on them in the classroom, in education, ability to focus in a conversation. If you look at every single trait of ADHD as far as the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorder describes it, you can link every single one of those traits to using a device. So inattentiveness, doesn't listen, you know, it all comes back to the role of dopamine. And I mean, dopamine is the main neurotransmitter involved in the disorder of ADHD. And if our device has an impact on that, it makes sense that actually we might be wiring the brain to develop ADHD traits.
Wow, and it goes back to what you've previously just been saying. It's reducing that screen time and then replacing that time with physical connection or being outdoors, or I don't know, doing a hobby or doing exercise or something where you can replace the dopamine hit that you'll get on a screen with the dopamine that you can get through the physical connection, whatever way that might be.
And it may not be easy, because especially if a child's had
Yeah,
the device for a long time, and you may have to very
it's
slowly
okay.
reduce it. And you may be, depending on the age of the child, you maybe do it yourself without being obvious about it. You might just slowly reduce it. But I think we're going to get to a point where we are going to suddenly have to start doing focus training, with children, because we now see. So this was in Ofcom's Children's Media Lives report. They found in their research that children cannot pay attention for a whole episode of a TV show. That's 24 minutes. So even the ability to watch a film is being
Yeah.
compromised. And, when did we get to a point where this was what we were aiming for, that our child can watch a film? Years ago, it would be, we don't want them watching TV. Now we just want them to be able to sit through a whole film without checking a phone or a device. But that's what we're doing to the brain. So I think we'll get to a point where we are going to need to do some training on focus. So how can we, almost like you do with muscle, you stretch muscle, don't you, to build strength in the muscle? I think in terms of focus, I think we will have to at some point start doing training to encourage the brain to be able to focus, or enable the brain to be able to focus for longer periods of time, so they can, if children can't sit their SATs, they can't sit their SATs exams. They haven't got the focus to sit a SATs exam. That's so incredibly worrying, isn't it? What's going to happen in secondary school, at GCSEs, in education? And I know you can get ChatGPT to do everything for you now, but even if that is the case, where you can get ChatGPT to do your university degree, so you don't need to think, but there comes the book Generation Zombie, because that's what we're creating, is that we're creating brains that can't sustain focus, or can't even stay focused for long enough to do a SATs exam. Then we're allowing them to use things like ChatGPT to do homework and everything. So they're never thinking for themselves. They're never exercising that creativity or that critical thinking. So how are they what's going to happen to them when they get older? What's going to happen to society when they get older? Who are going to be our world leaders? Who are going to be our thought leaders? Who are going to be the innovators or the business leaders? Who are these people going to be? And I think the one thing that will set your child apart in the future is the ability to focus, because we are at the moment creating a generation of children who can't focus, and that's become normal. and we're
Yeah.
seeking out diagnosis for that, but it's a symptom of the overuse of devices. So really trying to train the child's brain, and we can do it slowly. You might sort of remove the device a bit and play a board game and try and
Yeah.
get through a whole board game together, so it's still fun and you're
Yeah.
connecting. So get the child to try. If they can't focus for a whole board game, you might do something that's maybe a shorter board game, make it a bit easier. The ideal is you want a child to be able to read a book. You want them to be able to get through an entire book.
Yeah.
So that might be a bigger step for some people, but it could be that you start doing half an hour of reading a day. Maybe you do it together. And historically, that we as children have always been encouraged to read more for their reading and their English skills. But for me, I think as much as all of that's very, very important, it's about the ability to pay attention to something for long enough.
Yeah. Concentration. Exactly. We're going to move on to the final topic, which is devices and resilience. A child's voice. When something bad happens, I can just scroll, game, or watch something to distract myself. Why sit in bad feelings? A parent's potential response. But if you never face challenges head on, how will you learn to bounce back? I think I'm guilty of this, Charlotte, in terms of it's a parent's prerogative to make things right straight away. You don't want anyone to sit in an uncomfortable feeling, let alone your child. So are there ways that we can, use technology to strengthen rather than weaken resilience?
I'm going to say no. The thing is, sitting in bad feelings is what will build resilience. Yeah. So we
Yeah.
are very scared as a nation, or I think just a society in general, of feeling anything negative. It's
Yeah.
almost as it's negative. We must avoid that feeling. It's so unbearable. But feeling bad or not feeling good or tolerating unpleasant emotions is part of the normal human experience.
Mhm.
And we have got to a place in society where we want to pathologize every uncomfortable feeling that we have. And that is unhealthy. It
Yeah.
is good to not feel good all the time. It is helpful for a child when they are feeling distressed to sit and feel that feeling. Depends what's caused it, but to sit and feel the feeling, because what happens with emotion is you feel distressed about something or the child feels distressed about something. So that's the feeling. It's here. Let's just imagine this is the feeling, yeah? This is the feeling. Now, if we give the device, we sort of shove this feeling down, but the feeling's
Mhm.
not gone anywhere. You can't see it. I'm still holding this feeling here. Okay, so you keep the device, right? The child's holding this feeling under the surface, but this feeling just rises straight back up again at a later point when it's not got something shoving it down. So we need
Mm.
to take the feeling, we look at it, we explore the feeling, we work it out. It's essentially like me handing this to you. If you were my parent, I'd be saying, look, this has really upset me at school today. And you would say,
Mm.
yeah, that sounds really difficult. It sounds like you've had a really difficult day. What do you think you want to do about it? And you have a conversation with the child. Brilliant. That's you taking that feeling, and we can part
Mm.
that feeling and put that feeling back down. And that's it then gone. That's the feeling dealt with. So you've taught the child how to regulate their emotions. You've taught the child that what they're feeling is XYZ, anxiety, excitement, jealousy, anger, rage, whatever it is. You've taught them what it is, so they now understand that. You've taught them how to regulate it, how to think about it. They will carry those words with them forever, and they will learn how to that. They'll keep it with them and think, what would my parent have said? Not consciously thinking that, but those are the words that they'll think when something bad goes wrong in the future. That's emotional regulation. And what's happening now is that when a child is upset, so we see it from really young, 2 years old, 3 years old, is that we go, bang, device. So what you're
Mhm.
doing is saying to the child, forget about your emotions. That doesn't work. Forget. What you're doing is you're pushing the emotions down. And what we see in primary schools is that children can't label very basic emotions. So they can't
Mm.
label sad or happy. Primary schools report that children are much angrier, and that's because they are dysregulated. So they cannot cope with big feelings. They don't know how to tolerate them. They don't know how to manage anything that goes wrong. So they haven't got those problem solving skills anymore. So we need to just allow it. I know it goes against our natural instinct as parents to
Yeah.
do that. I really do get that. But I think if we reframe in our mind that actually maybe it's okay for them to feel bad about this, maybe that's normal for them to feel upset that they didn't get invited to the party. It's not nice, and we can educate on, we wouldn't want anyone to feel like that. And yes, that wasn't nice. And why do you think that you weren't invited? What's happened?
Mhm.
And exploring it a little bit more. Whatever it is that they're feeling sad about, it's better to explore that emotion
Yeah.
with them and explain to them as well and say, it's really normal that you feel upset about this particular situation, if it is indeed normal. But what we do when we put the device in is we teach the child that every time we're upset, I don't know what to do inside with this emotion and this
Mhm.
feeling, but what I will do is reach for something else. And
Yeah.
at the moment we're giving the device, so we say, reach for the device, but as they get older and they have access to other things that might make them feel good, like sex and drugs and alcohol and food, is that they will soothe themselves by reaching for an external object. And that's how we start to develop into these addictive kind of, or unhealthy, maladaptive behaviors when they get older. So at a very young age, my advice is, at every age actually, the devices should not be used to soothe. If you're going to use, if they're teenagers or whatever age they are, and they're using it for gaming or they're using it to speak to friends, fine, carve out some time, put some boundaries on, say, look, you've got it for half an hour and that's it. And if there's any argument over it, we're not having it again tomorrow night. So you set the boundaries, create the norms, but it should never really be used as a way of soothing emotion for the child. And I think if that explanation is used with your child and you sort of say, I'm trying to help you process your feelings, which is a healthier thing. And to be honest, your child will want that. So as much as when we give them the device, a child will always think mum knows best. So when you give them the device, they think that's the right thing and it makes them feel better. But what the child will want, because it's what makes us feel better, is for someone to see what we're going through, for someone to
Mhm.
recognize that we are struggling and to validate what we're going through. That is more cathartic than any device or iPad will ever be. And what you do is you take that ball of emotion away from the child. Because what we see otherwise is that you get to teenage years and you've got a child carrying around a whole sack of these emotionally, all of these things that they're carrying around, all of these problems, and they're lugging it around and they're weighed down and they feel anxious and unable to cope because they're not processing anything as they go along.
I think I also just want to bring in, we obviously talk about the younger age and how it's important to try and talk about their feelings at a younger age. Obviously, as our children get older, Charlotte, though, it is part of nature for them to start to shut down a little bit,
Mm.
so they're not going to be as forthcoming in their day-to-day dialogue, let alone if something is worrying them or they're angry or frustrated. So when it comes to the slightly older age group of our children, how do we handle that? Because you don't want to push them into a corner. I've done that on a few occasions. I pushed my son too far and he shut down completely. So are there a few suggestions that you could share about how do we approach someone who's slightly older, is not used to maybe talking about their feelings? How do we slightly reverse that pattern?
Yeah, so the ideal is to kind of create the environment where it's normal to talk about feelings. So then it becomes just a common part of the day where we say, I feel this way, this happened. And so it becomes normal to do it. But as you say there, if it's someone who isn't, reciprocity is always really good. So if you offer something up first, it can be
Yeah.
hard as a parent though, because sometimes your child is sort of, I don't care. I don't want to hear your problems about what you're going through.
Like,
Like you could offer, if you've got an inkling of what's going on with your child, I think offering up some sort of story that a similar experience that maybe you've gone through or that someone else has gone through, that has similar themes to what you think the child is going through. That kind of opens the conversation, and it on some level, on a unconscious level, it's sort of saying to the child, "Oh, this is okay to talk about," and yeah, that sounds really familiar to me. It gives them the space. And a child may not come to you straight away with that.
Mm.
They'll come to you when they feel ready. And I think there has to be that respect, I think, of how are they processing it. If we think that they are shutting down and they are spending too much time on a device and they are just ignoring their emotions, then it's more of a cause for concern. If it's something that you think is just on the surface, I think opening that conversation, having spaces where there are no devices, there's no distraction, and you're just sat talking. And this is why in the book I talk about no devices at the dinner table, because I think it's a
Mhm.
good space. You are so right in that it is very difficult with children to see when there's a problem because they don't present in the same way as adults. So over 50% of mental health problems start before the age of 13. And it's quite likely that we don't pick it up because they don't present how we would expect somebody to present with psychological distress. Because people present differently, boys present differently to girls, differently to women, children differently to adults. So we don't pick it up. Children present in really subtle ways. They'll do little things that you really have to have the space to be attuned to that, which I'd argue we don't have so much of anymore because we spend a lot of time on our device. The child is on theirs. So we haven't got that space to really attune to what's going on for them, before they can articulate. And it might not be that the child doesn't want to tell you. It's quite likely that the child doesn't recognize it themselves, that it's a problem, that they don't have the language to articulate it, and they don't have the emotional intelligence to be able to communicate what's going on internally for them. So it really is on us as the parents to be present. And I think that lives are busy now. We work, we've got children in school, we come home, we've got washing to do, tea to do, we've got to get them ready for the next day, we've got everything going on. It is
Mm.
difficult. But the time around the dinner table, or even if you all sit on a sofa, but that time is quite sacred. And I think even if just that space was without devices and screens, it's a space where you're then forced to start talking and to start paying attention to each other. And you can start to pick up more from your child about how their day goes, about if there is something bothering them, and you can help tease it out then. You can
Mm.
sort of help. It's a little bit, you are kind of tease, and these little seeds of doubt or issues, you can sort of pull them out of the
Mm.
soil at this age quite easy whilst they're still quite young. And it gives them that space to sort of say, they'll just come out with it. I mean, I certainly know with my daughter is that she doesn't necessarily come out with things straight away. It might take her a week and a half to percolate on something, and then all of a sudden it'll come out. But I'll know it's coming. So it might have bothered her at the time, but she's not going to necessarily tell me there and then about it. She'll pretend everything's okay, and it takes her time to process it because before it then comes out. So
Yeah.
that's, I think, just allowing that space and knowing what that pattern is, but just providing a space where it becomes normal to talk.
Absolutely. It's being patient, isn't it? Patient on how soon they want to talk about anything. Now, I
Which,
did say we were going to finish up, but there is a quote, Charlotte, that you reposted on Instagram, and I think it'd be really valuable to share, and it's to do with social media. Um, and you posted it from Smartphone Free Childhood, and it went on to say 50% of young people wish they'd spent less time on their smartphones growing up, and a third wish they had waited longer before using social media. Now, they're staggering, 50%. So just to kind of wrap up the conversation, how can we create that healthier digital space when even the generation now are turning around and saying, I wish I didn't have this much time on my screen?
I honestly believe that children who have spent their childhoods behind screens will be resentful of their parents when they get older, and I think that's sort of what that generation is saying now. And I've heard
Mm.
it from the horses' mouths as well. I have heard it from parents of that generation and people who of that age who have said to me, "There's no way on this earth they would allow their children near social media or devices because they live through it." So I expect that they probably feel. It sounds to me like there is some resentment over the fact that they were allowed. because we give these things to our children and they innocently accept them. And we need to make sure that we feel that this is the right thing for them. And this was the conversation I had with my daughter, because she used devices until I realized how bad they were. And then I took them all away. And I had a very frank conversation with her where I just said, look, I'm your mum and I work in this field, and I now know how harmful these things can be for you. It's my job to protect you. And as much as you may not like it, and you maybe feel annoyed with me at the moment, I think this is the best for you and your health in the future. And I worry that if you spend too much time on this now, it will make you unwell. I think I said in your mind, when you're older, because she was, young. And I said, I think it will make you poorly if you spend too much time on this. So that's why I'm taking it away. I'm trying to protect you. And I framed it like that. And when I framed it like that, she understood that was the right thing. I do feel that we are going to get to that point where especially if we allow children to spend too much time on it. So we have to be realistic that as they get into teen years, they are going to be using screens. Honestly, if we can give them a dumb phone and let them have access to certain things, that would be the dream. Social media for me is an absolute no. I think it is the worst thing for that young mind, in terms of the level of influence, the amount of information that they have to try and assimilate. It's too much. I find it overwhelming. It's overwhelming for a young developing teenage brain, and definitely not a child. So I think if we can have them a dumb phone, teach them about how devices can adversely impact them. So point out to them, you could have spent 2 hours learning your instruments, or you could have spent 2 hours running around, or you could have gone and seen a friend, but you spent all day doing that. You've wasted your time. We're pointing it out to them, get them to point it out to you, teach them healthy device use behaviors, set some boundaries in your home about what's normal. So it might be, like I say, if you can get to a point in your house where your children are allowed to, if you still want your children to use devices, if you can get to a point in your home where you don't have devices in the bedrooms, so everything, no phones, no gaming, no iPads in the bedroom. Because when we talk about online risk, which is not really my area as such, but the risk is far worse when the child is alone as well. So if they're in the bedroom, there's more risk, but they spend more time on them, so they waste more time. So no devices in the bedroom. Open dialogue and communication about what they're doing online, take an interest in their world so you can learn about it as well. No devices at the dinner table, ideally none in the back of the car as well if they're just on the school run, because you see kids just on devices everywhere. But I think if you get to that point where you set that, and then you have device free times in the house as well, you're not saying no devices, you're just dramatically reducing it, and you're changing the social etiquette surrounding how you use them. And that, in from my perspective, is the healthiest way forward. In terms of learning about these online worlds, people argue, oh, but they need to learn about them. They don't. A baby under the age of 1 can learn to navigate a phone or an iPad. Equally, someone who's in their 90s who never had tech can learn to use it. And by the time our children get older and into the workforce, the apps and the platforms that are being used will no longer exist. AI is growing so rapidly. The world, when our children enter the workforce, the stuff they're doing now, it won't even be being done. It's moving so quickly that they need to pick it up at that point. What's most important is their health, and their health is being adversely impacted by these devices. So we need them to be healthy. We need the interpersonal skills. That's what they're going to need to move forward in the adult world. And in terms of learning about AI and everything else, they can do all that when they get there.
So true. Yeah. Why start it now when it's not necessary?
Yeah.
Charlotte, we could talk for hours. I've got all these questions buzzing around in my head, but I'm going to finish up there, and I'm going to encourage everyone, obviously, to go out and get your book. If people want to learn more about you, Charlotte, where can they find out that?
Probably via my website. So it's www.charlottearmitage.co.uk.
Brilliant. Okay. And although we talked about social media, you are on social media again. But like I said, you're about reposting the benefits of not being on a screen or the impact that can happen if you spend too long on a device. But thank you so much for today. I really, really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.